Hey guys, it's me, Brandy, with just a quick note before the episode starts. I had this one ready to go before the pandemic happened, and somehow, just like my last episode, this one is also quite relevant during these times. If your kids are anything like mine, they have been spending more time on their iPads and phones, so you might need this episode more than you think. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled pre-pandemic episode.
Mom,
Today on Fortnite, I got second place. I was so close.
Mom, will you get me a snack?
Mom!
It's time for adult conversation. With me, your host, Brandy Ferner. Hello, Adult Conversation podcast listeners. This episode is not for the faint of heart. Oh boy. Mom, if you didn't like the short handjob scene in my book, you won't like this one either. Today, me and my guest, Joe Robertson, a sex therapist, leave nothing to the imagination as we talk about the importance of talking to our kids about porn. This topic was not on my radar at all until I saw Joe's TED Talk, but her perspective shook me, and so I had to know more. In this episode, we discuss the likelihood of early exposure to porn in the internet age, how this wires our kids' minds about what is normal, and Joe offers lots of practical things we can do to mitigate the damage. We also talk about ethical porn, the messaging around pleasure that our kids are and are not getting, and what conversations we need to be having with them, even in elementary school and before, not just starting in middle school. Unsurprisingly, there is a lot of laughter, partially because I have the humor of a 13-year-old boy, but also because Joe pretty much challenges me to bring up something sex-related that she hasn't heard of. And guess what? Challenge accepted. Am I victorious? You'll have to listen to find out. And a quick shout out to my newest Patreon supporter, Fran Cooper. Thank you, Fran. If you'd like to join Fran and the others in supporting this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/adultconversation. That's patreon.com/adultconversation. On to the show. So joining us on the podcast today is Joe Robertson. So welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I recently saw your TED Talk about why we need to talk about porn, and I was honestly super moved, which is why I reached out to you. This part of raising a young person was not really on my radar. Like, I knew that this was something that would come up, and it's like, oh, stay away from that. But I didn't really realize the things that you talked about in your talk, which were, what is that porn teaching our kids? Like, how is porn educating or really miseducating our kids? And that part kind of stunned me. So I was really moved by the whole thing. And I just really appreciate you being here today all the way from New Zealand.
Thank you. I'm curious. So you said you it wasn't something that you had thought about prior in terms of parenting. And I'm wondering, had anybody in your community or professional setting or school life ever talked about porn before? Was that the first time you'd kind of really grappled with it, or had there been little moments along the way?
I mean, obviously I have a history with like the first time that I saw it, but in terms of parenting, so I have a 12-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter, and I just hadn't thought about what you explain about how different it is that young people are learning about sex today as they were when we were younger. And in a second, I want to get into what you talked about on your TED Talk, like the difference between those things and sort of some of the problems. So that part was totally not on my radar about what is it teaching my son, just because he's older specifically, about pleasure and about sex. Like, might he see something that he doesn't have a frame of reference for? And that was something that we never had growing up to that extent. I will tell you about a story that was sort of, I didn't have a frame of reference for, but it's nothing like today. So, and I felt like with your TED Talk, I started it out and I was in tears, stunned, laughing, and then crying. I was like, and it's still like, I watched it again today and I got super emotional at the part, yet there's a part at the end where you just speak your truth about what society is saying about women when they allow this kind of porn to exist. And for the listeners, I'm and we'll get into this, but I'm not talking about just porn in general. Like, I have no problem with actual porn that's ethical and non-aggressive and all of that. So it's not like I'm a prude that's like, oh, we can't talk about or see those things. It's what's on mainstream porn today. And so I so related to you in that moment. So we have so much to talk about, but something I ask everybody that I have to ask you too is, what do you think the listeners need to know about you?
Lots of things come to mind. I was born in the Philippines, and then we moved a lot. So I'm technically what some people call a third culture kid. Have you ever heard that before?
No.
So that's where you grew up somewhere in a different country and then you move to a different country, but your parents are potentially from a different country to both of those things. So you don't have a specific culture or origin place.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I grew up a bit of everywhere around the world, but my parents are New Zealanders, but I was born in the Philippines. So you kind of end up in this ambiguous place.
Yeah. Do you end up feeling kind of like not rooted and a little bit lost, or how do you deal with that?
I think all of us as kids dealt with it slightly differently. But for me, yes, if somebody asks me, where am I from? I find that confusing. So even though my parents are New Zealanders and I live here, and obviously that's my accent and all of those things, I still sometimes think, but I don't really know if that's right. It's as I started my own family, I think that I felt a greater sense of place. But before that, it was confusing.
Yeah. Okay, so in addition to being somebody who gave a TED Talk, which is super interesting in itself, you work as a sex therapist. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, that's part of my life.
I think on the TED Talk, you talked about some of the things that you cover, but like, what exactly does that mean? What is your work as a sex therapist?
Yeah, I mean, some people hear that and they think it sounds a little bit creepy. Traditionally, some people had the idea about sex therapists that we actually touch people, but we don't. We basically specialize. So in the same way that someone specializes in trauma or abuse, personality disorders, therapists, essentially most therapists specialize in a particular field. And so that's what happens. So you specialize in the subject of sexuality. And so what that looks like for me is I work around the topic of pornography and betrayal for couples.
Oh,
and then
wow.
I also do some work with couples around sexual dysfunction or relationship breakdown due to issues in their sex life. So it might be that they don't orgasm, or that they don't ever get turned on anymore, or it might be I don't work with men by themselves, but it might be that there's struggles around arousal for him too. But they come to meet with me as a couple to talk through that.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so you're like cool with all the things. There's probably nothing I could throw your way.
No, I like all the things.
Okay. Awesome. Then you're so perfect for me.
I know we could go anywhere on this and that would be good.
Okay, so I feel like the bar was just sort of set to like for me to find something that would just like shake you to your core, which I won't do, but it's like there has been a little bit of like a seed planted there. So I'll be thinking in the back of my head.
Yeah, do it.
So in your TED Talk, you brought up so many great points, but one of the main ones was this question about how do we get our ideas about sex and pleasure? Will you talk a little bit about how we do that and how it was different back when we were growing up? Because I'm imagining we're around the same age, and then what it's like now.
Yeah, I mean, there are some similarities. So we did still get our ideas about sex and pleasure from media, and the media platforms have just changed slightly, but there are still some common threads there around movies and TV shows and music. Yeah, so generationally, that's quite similar. As probably our generation, we read a lot of magazines. So we probably read more Cosmopolitans, Girlfriends, magazines, maybe Teen Vogue and things like that. And historically, actually, those were much more sexualized than they are now. So there has been a bit of a shift in the magazine sector, in the kind of the print media sector, around creating more diversity, but also equality for women, and not telling a story about women's sexuality that solely revolves around a man. So when I was a teenager, it was definitely how to give the best blowjob, how to get him to stay into you, kind of how to keep him not from cheating on you. There were like all of these really problematic narratives around relationships and female sexuality. And there's been a shift. If you listen to print media editors and journalists, they have really moved in terms of wanting to be more empowering to women. But the porn industry, and not even just the industry, but people at home who are creating porn for themselves and then uploading it, they've stayed quite strong in that narrative around a lack of equality for women, and also being quite demeaning and derogatory to women, and that their sexuality revolves around a man. I don't know if that's intensified because I wasn't really exposed to porn as a teenager, but it's very strong now. So, and we know with mass consumption of pornography that, I mean, there is no doubt that that is influencing young people and the way that they think about sex, the way that they think about gender, but also the way that they actually do have sex and have relationships. So there are some similarities and some differences now.
Yeah, one of the things that I hadn't really thought about, or one of the many things that I hadn't thought about, was you talked about how back growing up, if you wanted to consume porn, you went to the video store and you went behind that curtain and you had to bring the tape up to a person in your community. Like, it was a very public thing. And then, you said when you went home, you had to find a TV to watch it on. Whereas today, it's like if a kid has a phone and there aren't settings, and what is right at their fingertips is it's not one title that you're renting. It's you have the whole library.
Yes.
And so just the immediacy of all of that is so different than how it was when we were younger. And you mentioned about how if you wanted to know about something, you would look in the dictionary and you'd get, sort of an anatomical description. But these days, if you want to know what a penis looks like or what it's all about, and you Google that, like, that's real different than the Merriam-Webster's definition.
I know. I actually tried to find a selection of encyclopedias so that my kids would be able to look up encyclopedias when they wanted to answer some of those questions. And my goal is to leave little books and images around that they can stumble across, or that they can sneakily try and find, but I'll have planted them there intentionally.
Oh, that's smart. That's like my parents had The Joy of Sex, I believe, on some bookshelf that I think they forgot. But of course, I think you and I, in your TED Talk, you talk about how curious you were. And I was the same way. Like, on the day that we learned about sex ed in school, they split up the boys and the girls and they gave us each like a pamphlet. And on the way out, I snuck a boy pamphlet. And so I was the only girl that knew the boy side. And man, was that really good.
Totally. I was exactly the same. I always I loved those magazines because I wanted to know everything I possibly could. Looking back now, I can see how heavily they informed my ideas around sexual performance and also gender. But I loved, accumulating all the knowledge about sex that I could, which makes a lot of sense to me now, given my career choices.
Right.
So it's really played out consistently through my life. And I think the other thing that with porn now is, so historically you either saw a static image, which was in, a magazine. So it might have been a nude woman, for example, or you would see a video and then you would need to probably watch that video over and over again if you wanted to continue to watch porn because you were limited by what you had rented or bought.
Right.
But now if you even just click on one scene, you are never just watching one scene. So even down the sidebar of the screen, you can see multiple scenes and there are advertisements. And so you are never just selecting one thing. You are essentially being guided through, a whole website, but always looking at about 6 different positions or relationships or different sexual engagements at one time.
Oh, the porn rabbit hole. Yes, it's vast.
Yeah, so you could choose, even if a young person chose to watch something that they deem to be more, equal in terms of the female and the male role, talking about obviously heterosexual porn, then they are still going to see some really problematic images down the sidebar. So, and they'll still see advertisements that call women names or that talk about impregnating women and then leaving her. They're still going to see all that content, even if they've chosen something that they deem to be more equal. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, too, what really opened my eyes in your talk was about what's popular. Like, the top most popular things on porn websites are so despicable. And again, like, I'm not a prude person, but and I don't think those things are about being prude. It's about being respectful of human life, and also not illegal. So I think that's the difference too, is not only is what's available, how much of it, but then the specificity of what is being shown and what people are choosing. I mean, that part. So then when we talk about, well, how do we get our ideas about sex and pleasure? And you think about when we were growing up, you didn't really see a lot of this stuff. And so you had this organic sort of thing that happened where, you're holding hands and then you're kissing. But these days, like what you were saying, is kids are being exposed to something so far beyond that, even before they have this frame of reference. And that was the part that really struck me, where I was like, oh shit, this isn't just like, oh, porn, you don't want your kid to watch porn, but it's like, no, you don't want your kid to completely ruin like their future sex life and possible relationships because they're seeing something and they're like making a set point off of something that isn't realistic and isn't legal and isn't kind.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it like a script, so essentially they learn a script for how to have sex,
right,
and they learn how to perform their gender, perform their sexuality with another person. And so they adopt that script from the online world, rather than it, exactly like what you're saying, it evolving organically based on relationships that they're having. It's what we call an anchoring bias, which is where their first point of reference or their first experience is often that's kind of the position by which they filter everything else through. So if their first sexual experience is online through porn, then that becomes the anchoring bias. And then they hear through sex education or through parents and caregivers or peers, they hear information through that lens, rather than looking at porn probably accidentally, but they've already had a really good, like, holistic, wonderful conversation with a caregiver, and then they see the porn through the lens of the conversation that they've had. And so one of my key messages to parents and caregivers is that, you really want to be the expert voice, and you want to be their anchoring bias. And the choice that you have is how early, you try and get in there. And it might be scary and uncomfortable and terrifying and awkward, but it is better for you to be their anchoring bias, as long as you're giving healthy messages, than Google.
Right. Yeah. You have me like, I'm kind of sitting here in a little bit of like a fugue state, just like I'm just sitting here sort of thinking about when I was in, I think it was 7th grade, this friend of mine had an older brother, and she was like, oh my God, I found this video in my brother's room. And so we put it in the VCR because he wasn't home. And I like, the stuff that happened, there was lots of blowjobs, which is something like I didn't even know could exist. And then there was lots of like ejaculating all over people, which I also didn't quite know yet. Like, I mean, you hear about it in sex ed, but until you see it in that way. And so I'm wondering, like, have I been scarred? Is this now playing out? Like, because I'm thinking when you're talking about this anchoring point, I'm like, wow, that was probably a pretty significant anchoring point to me. And so I'm just in my head a little bit like, so how did that actually have long-term effect? Because I remember my friend and I were laughing to the point of crying because we were just like couldn't believe what we were seeing. But then also, and my husband has heard this story so many times, but that next time we had sex ed in my science class, my teacher had this tin and you could write an anonymous question. And so after that video, I had about 1 billion questions. So I'm like, feverishly writing on these notes and then putting them in there. So this poor man, oh my gosh, this poor guy. He was like the most simple man. He didn't own a TV. He was just like a simple dude. And here he pulls out my note, and it's basically like, so what happens when a woman's giving a man a blowjob and all of that liquid gets on her face and then down her throat? And I just saw, and this is how much shame I don't have, which I think is like probably a red flag. But so I see him looking at this, and then I see his face just like fall. And instead of just sitting there, I was totally fine to just risk the anonymity to get the answer to my question. So I was like, well, if the one you're reading that you're not sure about, and then I just asked him in front of the entire class my question. And he was
How
just
did
like,
he answer?
yeah, I think he was like, I'm not answering that, Brandy. And then I was like, well, shit. And then now thinking about it as an adult, he probably should have put me on some list, where you're like, that kid shouldn't know about that yet. We need to check in with the family. So anyway, that was my first experience with any of that. And now I'm kind of trying to piece it together in my journey. What do you make of that? Is there anything that you immediately go, here's how you're fucked up and here's exactly why and how?
There's a few things that story highlights. Like, one is that some kids have a greater level of curiosity around their bodies and sexuality than others. And I'm not 100% sure why that is, apart from that we're all just interested in different things.
Yeah.
So, meeting the needs of your specific child is really important, and being intuitive about what they're curious about, responding to that. But the other thing is that when we are silent about certain things, so him not replying essentially sends a message, and our silence communicates as well. So we can give answers to questions, yes, but the questions we don't give answers to also tells young people what is shameful, what isn't okay, what is taboo, what isn't taboo, if you're a safe person or not. So if just the fact that you're not answering things sends the message to your young person or child that you are not the person to ask questions of.
Right.
So silence is not a good strategy. And you're totally right that someone should have kind of picked that up. And, that's one of the, I guess, red flags or points to notice in young people is highly sexualized language and questions that are kind of beyond their developmental stage. So if your 7-year-old all of a sudden knows a lot about anatomy and, but uses kind of different words, they're not saying vulva, they're saying, they're using
Pink
language.
taco.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry. See, I'm trying to get you. I'm not getting close.
No, it's good. We don't have that, and I've never heard that in New Zealand, but I'm with you in that I understand what that means.
I'm so happy to have introduced that to you. So now that when you have an American client come in, you will know exactly what they're talking about without having to ask.
A pink taco. Be like, does that have beetroot in it? Like, what is that? You do want to start, you do want to notice those things and ask questions. Historically, what's interesting, because I worked in trauma and abuse with children as a therapist for about 5 years. And at that stage, even which was probably, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, if a child said something about in sexualized language or about their body or about someone else's body, it was quite a strong indicator of abuse, because they were often such detailed things that the only way that they would know about those things is if they had really experienced them. And now it's not a strong indicator of abuse. It could be a strong indicator of what they have seen rather than experienced.
Right.
So definitely it's good for the community, whether you're a parent or a teacher or a social worker or youth worker, to be noticing those little things and asking questions and not being silent because you're communicating that it's taboo.
Yeah. Yes. I'm going to go back and tell Mr. Nichols he should have just sacked up. And,
yes.
But he was like, there was no right, as I'm looking back on it, there was no right answer for him. Like, if he did that in front of the class, the amount of parent backlash. But then if he pulled me aside alone after class, that's also sort of problematic. Like, what would have been like the ideal thing, to send a note home or like have me talk to a counselor?
There's so many layers to that, because if you were worried about potential abuse, you would not send a note home. If you were thinking that it was a safe context, then you might send a note home. But essentially, I totally understand that for him, he might not have even known the answer to that question, and making one up could have been problematic.
I wished he had gone that route. I would have.
And just made one up?
I would have loved to see him just grapple with like what words to use. That's the part of me that likes to be entertained, but I'll let him off the hook.
My science teacher, I went to a Catholic school, so we didn't really have sex education. And I remember him talking about heavy petting.
Oh.
and that was he didn't want to say obviously foreplay or touch generally,
Right.
or what we would call like digital stimulation, like. Yeah, no, he didn't want to go do any of those things. He just wanted to call it heavy petting.
Yeah, that was the safer
Yeah,
version.
and I was like, this is weird because now it's gone quite animal, and I felt strange about that.
See, there's almost like there's no winning. It's like it's all roads lead to somewhere that makes somebody laugh or something. But
it would be better. It would have been better for you to have at least someone somewhere to talk about that video you had seen.
yes.
So it would have been great if you had an opportunity to unpack that, and not in a shameful way, just like, this is this thing I saw.
Yes.
And there were lots of blowjobs and he was ejaculating all over her. Is that normal? Is that what's supposed to happen?
I can't imagine any person, any adult in my junior high having the capacity to even hear any of the words that you're saying. But maybe I've misjudged them. Maybe some of them could have.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe they could have. But that's what we want to see culture change around, is that there are more adults equipped to have those conversations, ideally someone at home, because that's a consistent relationship, but someone in their life that they can ask those questions of. Otherwise, they will just continue to get the answers online.
Exactly. And yes. And will you tell us, okay, so one of the other parts that really stunned me was the most popular porn that is searched and like the different categories on the most popular porn sites. Will you talk to us a little bit about what those are and how screwed up they are?
Yes. It's never a comfortable topic for people, but one of the things that I ask particularly parents to do is to just kind of push past their own discomfort, because that's for the good of the young person. So, it can be uncomfortable to think about sexual abuse or sexual violence or, anything that's demeaning, but we need to move through that discomfort because it's not about us. Like, it's just not. And it's about our kids. And so part of doing the best job we possibly can is pushing past that discomfort.
Yeah.
So in terms of how porn is produced, but also what is out there, so about 50% is what we call amateur porn. So that's user generated. So that's someone at home potentially. We actually don't know if they're getting paid or not, but it's low production quality. So it's it's either like, it could be on a phone, it could be on an iPhone being filmed, it could be just a really cheap, nasty camera. There's no lighting. So whether they're just doing that themselves at home or and hoping to get some money out of uploading it onto Pornhub, or there is some really small amount of income there, I don't know. But it's essentially, it's fundamentally different from someone who goes onto a set and gets their makeup done and has an outfit and then is, signs a contract, hopefully, or, so it's a different style in a different genre. So there's that, which means that historically, one of the key things people talked about with porn, and one of the things that they saw was problematic, was around body image. So they were like, porn stars have really big boobs and, they're really skinny and perfect. And a lot of porn actually isn't like that anymore. It's amateur, it's at home. There's probably more body diversity than there ever has been before in pornography. So there's amateur porn, and then there are different categories. So if you go onto any mainstream site, you'll see about, between 20 and 50 categories, and they often promoted kind of on the homepage. And the categories in and of themselves, just the titles of them are really problematic. So you get forced sex. I think I said on the TED Talk that on one website, which is the third most popular site, there are 7 categories solely dedicated to sexual assault. So 7 different categories that are around forced sex, and some of which appear to be underage, what we call child sex abuse material, traditionally known as child pornography. So that's not hidden in some deep, dark web. That's what I used to think, is that you used to have to like really hunt around the internet to find this content. But no, I mean, you could get out your phone now and, click 2 things and you would be at underage child sex abuse material. So it's not hidden from our our young people, it's very much open to them.
Right.
And yeah, the search terms now and the popular scenes are often quite violent, quite aggressive. There's a lot of what we now call sex with a family member. So that's brother, sister, mother, son, daddy, daughter. That's all the scenarios. And if you like, I was doing some analysis recently on Pornhub, and in their recommended videos, 60% of them were family sex.
Oh, wow.
So it's not niche or fetish. It's mainstream. And, we tend to think of that stuff as being really fetish, and only some people would be exposed to that, or some people would try and find it. But our young people will see that if they go on a mainstream porn site. It's not going to be hidden from them. And therefore, it's really normalizing or just very confusing.
Yes.
If you get messages from hopefully you get messages from your sex education or your family around what is and isn't okay in sex, or, what sexual violence is. But then on porn, you're seeing that it's not only present, but it seems to be arousing.
Exactly.
So it's what we call the eroticization of inequality. So that inequality or gender imbalance, power dynamics, all of that stuff, that's a turn on. And that is what people want when they have sex with you, or you're trying stuff out on them. That is what you should do. So you perform to what you've seen.
And I think one of the stats that you gave on the talk was that 40 to 88% of porn is aggressive, and 94% of the aggression is targeted at women. And then you have like what you're talking about, which is women responding in the videos as it's pleasurable. So you said something like, it's like calling me a slut while gagging me, and me responding with, yes, please, I like it.
Yes.
So obviously that's super problematic in terms of both parties watching that. So that's problematic for the aggressive counterpart, for the male counterpart, and then also for the female, because like you had talked about, is that girls these days are watching porn to figure out the answer to, how am I supposed to perform? What am I supposed to look like? What am I supposed to do? And they're seeing these things that are not real. I mean, not real in terms of, what's a better word for that? Not that it's not real, but, that isn't healthy and isn't about love and safety and consent. And so then it's like both sides are mislearning, and then they come together and they've both got two pieces of this, really dysfunctional, dangerous puzzle. And that to me is terrifying, and why after I watched your TED Talk, immediately, I showed my husband, and then I immediately had a talk with my son about it, because I just was like, I can't let another second go by, without him knowing that this thing exists. And I know you've heard about it, and let's talk about what you've heard about it, but just how off it is, that this should never be a set point for you.
Yes. There's lots of things in what you've said that are absolutely right and really important to highlight. So one of them is that young girls or women are not the only victims of this scenario. So I have 3 boys, and that is, hard work. But
Yes. And they're little. They're kind of little, aren't they?
They're really little. Yeah, they're really little. They're 2, 4, and 6.
Oh my goodness.
So they, they're just babies. And but I'm aware of what's coming for them and wanting to prepare them well.
Right.
But, they are also the victims of this cultural context. So they will similarly, as a female would, learn how to do sex from this. And so when we hear about boys potentially pushing boundaries or being coercive or even being aggressive during sex, I hear from boys that they didn't think that they were doing anything wrong there. They thought that that's what she wanted. And so he is not feeling great about that either. And he could be equally confused as she is about what they've seen and what they're doing.
Exactly.
But there is no, it's such a strong model for them, because it's a stimulus in which they're aroused to. So that's kind of a better platform for learning, but also it's visual in that, it's talking in sex ed, it's just someone telling you something, but watching something kind of in person is just so strong as an educator. Yeah, they are also the victims in that, the boys. There are lots of different pieces of research coming out around aggression, and it showed that young people were in fact seeing all the aggression that we knew was there. So there was kind of a hope that whilst we knew that aggressive porn was available to them, that maybe they weren't seeing that content, and maybe they were seeing something slightly better or more tame or mild or vanilla or whatever. And now we know that actually no, they are seeing the content that's non-consensual, that's assault, that's aggressive, that's violent, that's demeaning to women, where there's, pleasure is not being experienced by women in the scene. That is the content that they are, in fact, being exposed to.
Yeah, and you talked about in your talk about specifically about rainbow youth, like the LGBTQ community, and about how that's kind of its own problematic thing, that some of those stereotypes play out over there. Like one of the most popular gay scenes that you saw on one of the sites was obedient slave boys used like property. So things like this, where the gay porn that's out is reinforcing stereotypes rather than breaking down stereotypes or even homophobic discourse. So you see gay males being degraded for feminine looking traits. So it's like, I can see where on one hand having some of this stuff so that you can kind of see, well, do I like that? Does that arouse me? Oh, I guess, for sexual orientation and just kind of experimenting, like some of this stuff could be helpful to kind of figure out where you belong. But then there's this other side where it's not helping, where it's actually harming. And so you kind of have these both sides of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to acknowledge that for lots of the rainbow community and for some rainbow youth, that porn has been really, I would say, affirming for them. And for lots of people, it's actually been it's been a largely positive experience, in that it might be the first time they see two men holding hands or two women kissing, or, it's the first time they've seen some of the affectionate behaviors that they don't necessarily get to see in real life, or that isn't talked about in their sex education, or that they don't feel safe talking to their parents about. So it can be a really powerful, affirming experience. And I don't want to take away from that in terms that I really understand it. And I acknowledge that, and I hear it, because they are in a marginalized group, and lots of mainstream society is homophobic and afraid, or just doesn't even talk about it. So I completely understand that position. What is so sad, though, is exactly what you've said. So it is often the same narratives. So whilst it can be affirming, it can also be destructive at the very same time. And they really need a critical lens to look at the porn and go, hey, actually what's happening here is that they're degrading the person who looks the most gay.
Right.
That they're swearing at him, and that he is having to be obedient to the master, who is the straight looking person. And so it really can further embed power dynamics and heteronormativity and homophobia. Like, it really can actually cement those ideas rather than pull them down.
Yeah, and in my area, there's been debate about what should be taught in sex ed, because they just redid the curriculum, and a bunch of people are having a hard time with there possibly being any homosexual inclusion in that. And you bring up such a good point, which is, if these rainbow youth aren't learning about this stuff in a sex ed class, then Google is their educator. So the disservice that we're doing to them, I mean, I already fully support them being included and then some, but like this part of it, it's like it affects them forever if they're not included in this, not just to feel like they belong, but also legitimately to educate them about things so they do not have to go to Google to do it. I just think that is so important.
Yes, and the other thing that happens with sex education that I'm not saying I have answers to or know how to do necessarily better, but the message that quite strongly comes through from young people is that they don't just want to hear about biology, anatomy, STIs, and contraception, that is not a satisfying conversation for them, and that is not robust education. They actually want to learn about pleasure and about healthy relationships, and they want to learn about how to do things well, and how to ask if the other person's into the same things as them. And those are the layers that are the most uncomfortable, I think, for adults, but that's the
Right.
stuff that they're really hunting out and they're really looking for. So, okay, if we don't want to answer those questions, we are definitely just leaving them to their own devices to figure it out. If you don't want to have the conversation, if you don't want to educate them around pleasure, then you to some extent are saying, okay, porn industry, I'm allowing you to do that for me.
You're giving them that power.
Absolutely. And so they just have questions. And I mean, in New Zealand, at least, our sex education curriculum is pretty fantastic. But
Of course, because your whole country is amazing.
I think it tries to be. But no, we have this.
I think it does a good job.
We have a really great curriculum, but it's not necessarily implemented excellently. So it still relies heavily on essentially teachers to teach content that they might not feel confident in or comfortable with, or that they
Oh.
maybe even just don't know that much about, or they're not sure how to educate around pleasure. So the curriculum can be spectacular, but that doesn't mean implementation is equally spectacular.
Well, so, you have such a good background to answer this question, but in what ways, because I know that there's probably listeners out there that think all porn is probably awful. What would you say are the benefits of porn?
Well, I think for people who come from cultures or maybe religions where sex is not talked about, where they genuinely don't know what to do when they get married, for example, where there's a complete lack of knowledge, then I know sex therapists have recommended that they watch porn. I am not a particular fan of that, only in that I feel I know quite a lot about mainstream porn, so you would have to be really specific about where you are directing people. And I know people for whom they use maybe a more ethical platform or a feminist porn platform to learn to feel normalized in their in the things that they're kinks or the things that they're interested in. I know that does exist for people.
Yeah, this the idea of ethical porn was something that I didn't know existed, and you said that it's porn that prioritizes female pleasure, it's got body diversity, and it's ethically made. It's like buying organic strawberries in a sense. It's like the organic version, but it's not even a category, you said, on some of the main porn sites, and it's something that you have to go out of your way to find, that you have to, put in a credit card that you have to pay for, which makes sense because people would be paid for it, and that makes sense, but it's harder to get, and so it's not going to be that common that's what people, and especially young people, are seeing.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, it's also important to note that it hasn't actually been assessed. So there hasn't been a content analysis on feminist or ethical porn yet.
Huh.
So there is no fair trade stamp. There's
no organic label.
No, there's no way of really knowing at the moment whether they're just saying those things, but really does it represent the same models of sexuality as mainstream porn? We don't know. We are doing some research around that, collaborating with another organization. And so we hope to have some more robust answers to those questions after that, where we're going to assess it, we're going to analyze it and look at the power dynamics, look at pleasure inequality, look at, aggression, safety, is condoms being used, is there lubricant present, all of those kinds of things help make it ethical or feminist, but we don't know for sure yet if it is.
Got it.
So there are organizations who are definitely wanting to create that kind of porn, who are really passionate about it, who also want to create, what we call user-generated ethical or feminist porn. So people at home, your average everyday couple who, this is some of the producers talk about, like fanny farts and
wait, what?
And slips.
Wait, what? I need you to explain.
So, I think some people call it a queef.
Oh,
yes.
Oh, this is amazing. That reminds me, in 6th grade, the word to look up in the dictionary to give yourself a giggle was smegma. Is that a universal thing? Do you know of this?
No. What is smegma?
Oh God. And now I've backed myself in a corner where I have to tell you what smegma is. Could I tell you to Google it?
Yes. Okay.
Oh, it's like,
Can I do that
now
right
I feel like now I feel like Mr. Nichols. I'm like, Joe, I'm not going to answer that even though I brought it up.
Smegma, a sebaceous secretion in the folds of the skin, especially under a man's foreskin.
There you have it. But I first related to it as in between, like in the labia.
Okay.
And so that was a thing when you would like in your class, you would like go look at the dictionary and then you'd leave it open to that page and then someone else would come and then they'd laugh and they'd go sit down. This was like a thing. Okay. Anyway, back to queefing.
I'm looking at the images now. I've moved past just the description and now I'm trying to find
Oh
an
no, are you in a
image.
vortex? Are you in a
Yes.
rabbit hole?
This is my whole, oh, I see. I'm looking at it now. I know what you're talking about. Wow, there are some really gross images there.
Oh.
Yes, so some
I mean, did you have any question that there would be?
No, I'm good. I'm covered. So some ethical porn producers want to create, they actually often don't even call it porn. So they want to detach themselves from the label porn because of what mainstream porn represents. So they might call it adult cinema, or they might call it erotic content. And they want it to be representative of a really normal experience where there's strange noises, giggling, awkwardness, where your, tummies slap together and make a funny sound, or,
Right.
So all of that stuff that lots of people experience, but that isn't represented in mainstream porn, and therefore we feel is not normal. They want to normalize that. The question is whether it does. So again, we haven't analyzed it or assessed it yet. So I don't want to just send people down to a platform which we don't know enough about.
Yeah.
And I have had parents say to me, oh, should we just send our kids to ethical porn? And I'm like, no, definitely not at this stage. But also, I don't know if it will gain enough popularity. So I don't know if people will find that content stimulating enough to pay for and to watch as their education. I don't know. We're not sure of that yet.
Right. And at the end of your talk, you were very serious about you must talk to the teenagers in your life about porn, that it was a non-negotiable. And, we as parents need to plant a seed with them that porn might not be healthy and let them know that we are a safe person to talk to. So how do we do that? Yeah. And I'm curious too, you've got a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and 6-year-old. Are there things that you have already started doing that are maybe a little bit more passive or subconscious rather than having a big conversation like I could have with my 12-year-old? How do we do this? How do we save them from, having their set point for sex and pleasure be like totally bonkers?
Yes. And that is really hard. And I'm not assuming that everyone's going to find that easy or comfortable, or that it's just like there's going to be a quick fix there.
Right.
So it's much more nuanced. But one thing that we're always aiming for is something called porn literacy or wider media literacy. So we know that if young people can see an image and critique it, that the image itself is not going to have as much of an impact on them. So if we can teach them what is problematic about pornography, then if they stumble across it or they get shown it by a friend, and the chances are that they probably will, if they can critique it, then it won't set them up in the same way that for a young person who has no other reference points, it will. So porn literacy is essentially being able to identify the unhealthy or problematic messages. And those are around, there's kind of 4 key things that we talk about in terms of problematic messaging. So one is around gender, so gender equality or inequality, the power dynamics, the male being in a controlling position, the female being in a submissive position, or in gay male pornography, that, the gay person is the one who is submissive. So if they can identify that, they are much more likely to critique it and it doesn't have as much of an influence. The next thing is risky sexual behaviors. So, group sex or no condom being present or no lubricant present, for example, in anal sex, then those are risky sexual practices. And so if they can see, hey, doesn't look like anyone put a condom on there, then that's them obviously showing critical thinking. And then identifying aggression. So no, it's actually not okay to call a woman a bitch, or it's not okay to choke her during sex. It doesn't look like she's having a good time there. And so being able to identify aggressive behaviors. And at the moment, that's what our young people are lacking, is the ability to fully identify and critique the aggressive behaviors because it looks erotic and arousing to them.
Right.
And then the other one is the other sexual behaviors, in particular around pleasure. So did she climax as well as him? How do we know that? Did he ejaculate on her face? Do we think that's going to be nice?
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I know,
what
you're
kind of
like, you're triggering me back to like 7th grade.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like-
you were there. So what kind of stimulation happened for either of them? In a lot of porn, it's just the male being stimulated. She gets no attention. So it's rare, really, for a woman to receive oral sex or digital stimulation with fingers before sex and to really look like she's being fully aroused prior to having intercourse. And we know that most women need at least 20 to 30 minutes of foreplay before having intercourse for it to be like really, really enjoyable. So, if young people can know those things about sex, and then if and when they stumble across it, that they can see, oh no, she's like, does look like she's really having a good time there, then they're less likely to use it as their sex education tool.
Right. And you also talked about something about the 3 different components of the heart, head, and hand in your talk, which I thought was really great. So will you detail that for us?
Yeah. So if your young person or your child has seen porn and you've either found out or they've told you, that's what I call disclosure or discovery. So they've disclosed it or you've discovered it. Then the first thing to do is to ask them how they're feeling. So that's kind of reaching out to their heart first. So it's quite easy to jump into, oh, this is what's wrong with porn, and this is what happens to you, and it's gonna make you have bad sex, or it makes you think that it's okay to be violent, or it's easy to jump straight to that point, or to even jump straight to strategies like, oh, you're not allowed to have a phone anymore, or I'm going to put a filter on your device, or go straight to kind of consequences. But first, what we need to do is really build the connection between the adult and the child. So thank you for telling me, or I totally understand you probably came across this by accident. I know lots of young people feel pressure from friends. I really want this to be a safe place to talk. I really care about you. And asking them how they felt. And there's kind of 2 elements to that. One is, how did your body feel? So if they felt aroused, they might say it felt kind of good, and normalizing that for them. So that's okay. It's totally okay if your body felt good watching that. Actually, that's a sign that your body is working and that it's really healthy. So normalizing arousal, really, really important. And then, so it's kind of, how did your body feel? But then at the same time, how did your emotions feel? And that can often be, I felt a bit yucky, or it made me uncomfortable, or I felt confused. And it is, or it can even go to, I felt traumatized. They might not use that language, but that might be what's coming up for them. So it's important for us to kind of talk about that we can experience both things at the same time. So we can actually be aroused and traumatized at the same time, and normalizing that for them.
Such a good point.
So I call it, my language is, if you touch something hot, you get burnt. So that's a physiological response. So when we see nudity or sex, we have a physiological response, which is arousal. So there's no shame in that. There's never any shame in arousal. It's your body working. It's actually just healthy, and it's having a normal response. So I don't believe we can, I don't believe we should especially shame a young person for being aroused by content, but being able to identify for them that, hey, that's totally normal, but here then are some of the problems with it. So you address their heart, how are they feeling, what was going on for them. Second thing, okay, here's what can be unhealthy about porn. And that's where you're hitting those 4 points. So gender, risky behavior, aggression, and sexuality. So grass.
Yeah.
And the other one, so the other one is mental health, and that's what I call grams. So you're hitting your 4 points, your grass points, but I throw an M for grams, which is your mental health. So it can make you think about porn more than you usually would. It can make you feel like you want to keep going back to it. That's what people typically call addiction, but I would never use that language for a teenager because it's way too strong, and they're going to take that label with them into adulthood, and I don't really want that for them in really formative years. And then hands is really talking about strategies. So you've got heart, you've got head, and then you've got hands. Like, what are we actually going to do from here? And asking for their ideas in that is really important. So they're your ally. You're not just going to tell them what you're going to do.
Exactly.
Like, hey, what do you think that we should do as a family to protect ourselves or to make sure that we don't see this kind of stuff? Or what do you think we could do as parents to help you know more about sex? What do you want to know from us? And we're going to get this book and this book and this book, and we're going to, you can read them anytime you want. And we're going to use a filter, or we're going to have all of our, whole family are going to leave their phones in the lounge at night. So you kind of develop a family culture rather than just making it about the young person themselves, because that's further shaming them. So how do we all do this technology life a little bit differently, because it can impact all of us?
And then the father is like, but not me.
Yeah.
But I need my phone. So.
And that is going to be the challenge, I think, for parents. I already feel that, my 5-year-old, he's now 6, he started asking for a phone. And I thought, crap, like, I was like, why does he think that the phone is so important? It's like, probably because he sees me use it all the time. And he sees it as an extension of my being. The challenge for me then is, how do I show him that my phone is not that important? And that is hard and challenging. And I'm on that journey too.
Yeah.
Another tool for parents is what I call C4, or the 4 C's, around the porn conversation. So if you're having a conversation with your young person and they disclose that they've seen porn, there's kind of 4 key things you want to know from them.
Okay.
So key questions. The first is around consumption. So how much porn have they seen? How regularly? Because there's a real big difference between someone who saw porn once last week to someone who's been watching it every day for a year.
Right.
So actually, rates of consumption, we want to know that from our young person, because I've had parents who are just like having a flip out because they know that their kid saw something at school. I'm like, it's probably okay as long as you unpack the messaging, they're probably going to be fine. But, so consumption, access, how often, that kind of stuff. That's important to know the impacts. The next is the context. So always ask a young person where they first saw porn. How did they come across it? Were they experiencing any pressure? And one of the key points we want to get out of that is, did an adult show them? So which is a form of sexual abuse and or grooming. So we really want to know the safety there in their peer group friendships, but also in their adult relationships. So you've got consumption, then context, then content. And this is the part that parents often find quite hard, is asking the question, like, what did you see? So that would be back and, think about your story with your seeing the multiple blowjobs pornography.
Right.
So that would be the adult in your life asking you the question, like, what did you see? Was it someone kissing another person? Was there more than 2 people? Was there 5 people? Were they having anal sex, oral sex? Who was doing what? And that's kind of can be the most confronting thing for parents, and they tend to have quite a shocked response if it's something more than what they were expecting. But why it's important to know that is because then we know what the likely impacts are. So if they saw, lesbian sex, let's imagine, lesbian porn, where it's 2 women, they're probably kissing, touching each other, playing. It's often quite kind of fun and baby-like because it's made for men, not for lesbians.
Right.
But it's often like a bit more tame. They're not hitting each other around, for example.
Right.
So we want to know the content that they're seeing so that we can understand the impacts on them. And so then that 4th one is just, are they experiencing any consequences? Like, are they feeling traumatized? Are they feeling unsafe at school? Are they worried about relationships in the future? Are they starting to look at dad differently? So, how are they feeling internally? So those are the 4 kind of key elements you want to get out of that conversation, and then unpack, obviously, the messaging after that.
That's so helpful. And what you said on the talk is that these conversations are not one and done, like checking in every few weeks or months or however, which reminded me that the conversation I had after I saw your talk, my son, because I asked him, I said, have you heard of this? And then let him tell me what he had heard. I said, have you seen any of this? And he said, no, but there's a kid in one of my classes who will show us his phone and he'll scroll to Pornhub and he'll show us like that he's been on that or that he has history there and whatnot. And I realize I need to check back in with my son and just say, hey, wondering about that kid in your class and wondering, and I mean, I told my son ways to not see that and to stick up for himself and all of that. But, you never know what happens. So I liked your idea of it's not like you have the big talk and then you walk away. It's like it's an ongoing thing.
Definitely. And that's where I think with our kids, yeah, we've started young talking about media, talking about the internet, talking about bodies, anatomy, relationships. And we don't say anything that we believe to be inappropriate or too early, but everything is kind of feels really organic. So we don't really have intense, like, I'm going to sit down and have an intense conversation with you. I have a lot of brief, quick kind of chats in the car or talking whilst I'm making their bed. My son, who's 6 now,
Right.
has had his first crush on a girl. And I know, which is really cute. And, and, it's easy to go like, oh gosh, what do I say about that? And then I thought, I think it'd be good if he knows that I'm a safe person to talk to about crushes on girls or boys, if that's the way it lands. And
you are the safest person. You need to not only tell him you are a safe person, but you are literally the safest person in the world.
I'd hope so. So I could tell he was deeply embarrassed. I'd found this love note in his bag. And he was feeling so embarrassed, which I thought was really fascinating from a 5-year-old, that there was something there he felt he should be ashamed about.
Gosh, right. Like so young.
Yeah, like we had never talked about that, about relationships like that. And he'd always had lots of little kind of girlfriends. But yeah, it was really interesting to me that he kind of innately experienced that. But anyway, I just thought, okay, how am I going to talk about this with him? He can't handle a face-to-face conversation. That he was feeling it too deeply. I could tell he couldn't even look at me. And so I went in and I just made his bed. And I was just like, oh, just tell me about the note. Tell me about who it was for. Tell me about what you like about them. Tell me about what happened when you gave the note. Do you want to write another note? You could just tell us if you need help with that. Just kind of normalizing the note writing process.
Yeah.
But also that, yeah, we are it for him. We are on his team. Like, we want him to do well in this area of his life, and we will totally champion him through relationships. Yeah, so it's all those little details that you start really early. So we are very open about bodies, very, very open. He's asked me all about periods and tampons and pregnancy, and we've managed to have enough conversation about sex that he doesn't know a penis goes into a vagina, but he knows how dad gives mum a seed and then it gets planted in her tummy. And like, we have a whole story around it.
Right.
That's enough. That's enough for him to feel satisfied, but not so much that another parent, if he told his friend that another parent would freak out. And that's
exactly.
holding that tension. But I do believe as parents as well, we have to support each other as parents. So I will tell my friends, hey, just letting you know, I talked about this with my son today. Or I've told his preschool, hey, just letting you know, we talked about body parts this morning and about what he can't touch on other people and what people can't touch on him. And just kind of forewarning the adults in his life so that they are prepared if that comes out in other kids, because he's shared it.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So if your young person sees porn and you've had that conversation with them, or you've discovered it on their phone or whatever, I mean, I know it's really hard, but I really encourage you to tell their friends' parents, because the chances then of those children having seen porn are much higher. That's really hard because parents often feel some level of shame there. Like, I don't want other people to know that my kid watched porn or saw it. But actually, you're doing a great service to them if you prepare them for what's happening in the friend circle.
Yeah, I was thinking about that kid in my son's class and thinking, gosh, a parent, if only a parent was looking in on the search history, and, who knows if they are, if they aren't. But I feel like I want to tell all parents, check your kids' phones, like as much as you have, whatever you've set up with them, like with my son, he has a phone, but he knows that we can check anything at any time that we want to. And we trust him hugely, but he knows that that's part of the deal until he reaches a certain age where that privacy seems, like we've reached to that point. And I don't know when it will feel like that, but it just kind of blows my mind sometimes that that there are parents out there that don't check their like middle schoolers' phones. I
Yes.
personally think that that's an important thing, and almost like one of the deal breakers with giving your kid a phone is you cannot have this unless you give me the passwords. And I know that they know ways around things. We have some friends who lock their parents out and all these things happen or whatever.
Yes.
But I just think that they should know that. And there's always going to be the kid with Pornhub whose parents aren't checking his phone, and you wonder, why is that?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the best things we can do is keep talking to other parents, send them this podcast, send them the TED Talk, like just
Yes.
distribute the message, because if your child's wider community is on the same page, then they are much safer. Just informing as many people as you can around some of the vulnerabilities online means that we're kind of doing some herd vaccination.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Right.
we're just like trying to prepare as many families and kids as possible so that we really want to create culture change, and we can't do that by staying silent in our own homes. We can only create mass culture change by continuously talking to each other about what's happening in our own families or what we've heard online, what we want to do differently. So spread that message far and wide. I am so passionate about I don't know what we call it, primary school, but it's like age 5 to 10. What school is
Oh,
that?
yes. It's called elementary school here.
Elementary. So I'm really passionate about parents in that particular age group being really prepared, because that's when we're preventative. So often parents only engage in the porn conversation once they've got a teenager. And whilst that's good, the likelihood that they've already been exposed to porn is quite high, but also we can be really preventative there and delay their exposure even later if we put measures in place when they're young. So I'm really encouraging elementary schools like what you have to run parent nights and get all the parents on board in terms of like getting an educator in, talking about pornography and other vulnerabilities online, and then everybody's kind of like, hey, let's do something about this. Don't just wait till adolescence.
For the elementary school age, is that really like filters and limiting their probability of being shown that, in addition to what you're talking about, which is showing yourself as a safe person in case they need to talk about that? Is that in line with what you would recommend, or are there any other little things?
Yeah, so definitely delay. Delay is really important. So that is the filtering software. We know that the earlier a young person is exposed to porn, also the more vulnerable they are to the impact. So if we can delay, an 8-year-old seeing porn till they're 14, that's fantastic.
Got it.
So delay, you are a safe person, always holding the relationship and the connection really strongly, but also talking about media. So starting the media literacy early. So, if your kids are watching a show, talk about what's problematic about that show and why we don't think it's a good idea to watch that. I have these conversations with my sons actually quite a lot where they're like, why can't I watch Pokemon or something? And
Right.
I'll say, because of this, this, and this. And I say things like, all of us, mum and dad as well, we're learning all the time. And what we're learning from these shows is X, Y, Z. And then they can go, oh yeah, no, we do learn from TV or songs or movies or whatever. So just kind of slowly embedding those ideas. And I've now started talking to my son about, the 6-year-old, about how not everyone on the internet is safe and how not all of the internet is good. And so I'll say, like, you can't just be on, we don't use YouTube. We don't use YouTube Kids at all, ever.
Yes.
And so saying things like, he'll ask why, because not all of the internet is good, and there are people on here who actually try and hurt children or want to teach them things that we don't think are good for you. So, slowly you're drip feeding these ideas out.
Yeah, for them to be like a little bit skeptical or critical of what they're seeing. Yeah.
So even advertising, like fortunately with Netflix, you don't get any ads, which I really love. But if they do sometimes see an ad on TV, I'm very quick to be like, see, what they're doing there is they're trying to sell you that thing.
Yes. We have that conversation all the time.
Because otherwise they don't know. And also you're starting conversations around bodies and privacy, and it's a drip feed kind of a process. And I'll say things like, if anyone ever shows you a a picture, a photo, a book, a TV show, a game that has anyone with naked people in it, then that's not for children, but you can absolutely tell me about it. So I have kind of introduced that idea of nudity in image, and that does exist, but I've not labeled it as pornography.
Those are all such helpful things. And I think I know you're exactly right about all of it comes together to set a foundation. And even the stuff about consent, which, gosh, early age gives you so many opportunities for that, about touching and pushing and hitting and kissing when, somebody doesn't want it, when it's all that sort of innocent stuff. But it's a great time to talk about consent. We've been huge on that in my house.
Definitely. We talk about that everybody is in a bubble.
Right.
And everybody has their own little bubble, and we need to ask each other if we want to go into their bubble.
Yeah. And just to think how that affects, their sexual encounters later in life, like to have that foundation, which is so different than a lot of the conversation that was happening when we were being raised. But just to think that you could have a kid that just so understood consent when they got to high school. I mean, not that they're not going to mess up. So it's not that it's just all of a sudden, you tell them and it's perfect, but just even being brought up with that and being treated that, people should respect their bubble, but then they should respect other people's bubble, I feel like is already miles ahead of kind of where we came from when we grew up.
Yes, I agree.
In closing, will you explain to us what the Light Project is that you work with?
Yes. So the Light Project is basically a group of different health professionals. So we've all come from a slightly different discipline. Like I come from a therapeutic background, but the others come from different backgrounds. And we pull all that knowledge to do research. So look at all the literature around porn. Then we do surveys on what we call youth stakeholders, so people who are engaging with porn on a regular basis. And then we do training. Okay. So in the health sector, in the education sector, amongst parent and community groups, the police, for example. Yeah, so we go out and we talk about pornography, and we talk about what the new landscape is. That's what we call it. So the new online landscape. And then we talk about the impacts, and then some strategies for culture change, but also conversations. So that's kind of our way.
Wow.
There's lots of good books on our website, and so people can go there, look at the books. We kind of talk about a few different filtering services, parents conversation starters, things like that.
And what is your website? How would people get to you?
thelightproject.co.nz.
Jo, thank you so much for doing the work that you do. I like I said, when your video came across my feed, I was it's just stopped me. And then my whole day became about it. I became posting about it, having my husband listen to it, talking to my son. And then immediately what happens is when I see something that moves me so much, I'm like, podcast guests, is there any chance that this person would even consider doing this? So I cannot tell you how excited I was when you said yes to it. And this interview has been more than I had dreamed of. The fact that I could teach you pink taco, I feel just really...
And smegma.
That's right. Let's not forget. That was a lot of really helpful but really dense information. But one of the major underlying themes, I think, is us getting past our own stuff and discomfort so we can communicate with our kids about hard topics that really do affect their lives and future relationships. It reminds me of the Screens Are Not Evil episode I did with Jordan, where he talks about having critical dialogue with your kids about what they're seeing on their screens and the games that they're playing. If we teach our kids how to thoughtfully critique things, it gives them the power to do that for the other problematic things they see that we don't even know about. I think that is maybe the biggest takeaway for me here. I'll link to Jo's amazing TED Talk on the podcast website. So did you know that I have a website with transcripts of every single episode with links and guest info for those moments when you can't listen to something but can read? I do. This exists. It's adultconversationpodcast.com. Also, it's definitely easier said than done to just get past our own stuff here so we can talk to our kids about it. I know many people have a history of abuse and trauma, and it's hard to heal from that and show up to a conversation that is potentially triggering for ourselves. So I really want to honor that. And I think Jo makes a great case for trying to do our best here. As always, thanks for listening.
Here I